Belief in Jesus is based upon evidence. That is to say, it is not a blind faith. It doesn't just believe for the sake of believing. That isn't how it works there. Faith in Jesus is based upon evidence. That is to say, it is based upon compelling reasons for belief. And in this case, in the case of our text, the evidence was that the nobleman was responding to was the numerous accounts of miraculous healings by Jesus that were spreading throughout the area. And so there were reports of this. He was hearing about it, and then he heard that he moved into his region, and he was responding to that. But he had heard all of these accounts in advance about incredible things that were happening at the hands of Jesus in his ministry. This is evidence. It's evidence. It's important to note with that, before we go any further, that there is a big difference between evidence and proof. A big difference between evidence and proof. Evidence is details and clues which support the existence of some truth that has not yet been verified. Absolute proof, on the other hand, is what we have when something has been physically verified 100%. In other words, evidence is clues that something exists. Proof is when we see it with our eyes and hold it in our hands. Do you see the difference? There's evidence and there's proof. They are different. With that said, the faith that the nobleman in our text displayed was not based upon absolute proof that Jesus could help his son. It was based upon evidence that he could help his son, right? And this distinction is important because it teaches us that belief in Jesus is not based upon absolute proof. It is based upon evidence. Are you 100% will you follow me on this one? He wasn't responding to proof here. He was responding to evidence. And this is exactly in line with the way that the author of Hebrews defined faith in Hebrews 11. I'm going to put that up on the board for you now. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. It's the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Faith, by biblical definition, is the belief in things hoped for, but not yet absolutely proven. Does that make sense? It's the belief in things hoped for, but not yet absolutely proven. And please keep that in mind as I make this next statement, because when I make this next statement, it's going to rub you wrong, and you're going to probably be upset by it. But I promise you that it's all in line, it's biblical, okay? So just bear with me, all right? Here's the statement. We can't prove what most of us believe as Christians. We can't prove that. We can't prove the things that we believe in most cases as Christians. For example, we can't prove that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Was anyone there to see it happen? None of us were. Can't prove it in that way. We can't prove that there's an afterlife. Has anyone been to the afterlife and come back besides Jesus? No. Can't prove it in that way. We can't prove that Jesus is alive and seated at the right hand of the Father in the heavens, because no one has been up there to see him sitting there. And some of you might say, well, wait a minute here, we have the scriptures right in front of us. That proves it. But we really can't prove the authority of Scripture either. We can't prove that it was dictated and handed down empirically in the way that a lot of us want to say it. We can't prove most of what we believe as Christians. And to claim that we can is to claim falsely. It doesn't work that way. But just because we can't prove what we believe, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem with what we believe. Because belief is based upon evidence. It's not based upon proof. Does that make sense? It's based upon evidence, not proof. So just because we don't have proof yet doesn't mean that there is not compelling evidence that we should believe in Jesus. Hopefully you follow me here. Just because we don't have proof yet, all we have is evidence now, doesn't mean that the evidence isn't compelling and we shouldn't absolutely 100% follow Jesus. Faith is based upon evidence. And the Bible teaches that it is faith, not proof, that draws us towards God. And this is why the author of Hebrews writes in the very same chapter, and without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. The King James says those who diligently seek him. I always think of it that way. I like it that way. It is faith, not proof, that draws us towards God. Why is this the case? Is God against proof? Does God not like proof? Is proof a bad thing? No, not at all. Proof is a wonderful thing. However, proof is not something you can have before faith. It doesn't work that way. And those who insist upon proof before faith simply don't understand how faith, or proof for that matter, works. They're getting the cart before the horse. And this is why Jesus said in verse 48 of our text, getting back to the text that we just read, unless you people see signs and wonders, you simply will not believe. He was lamenting the people's tendency to seek proof before they sought faith. Do you see what he's doing there? He's like, you want to see the proof first. It doesn't work that way. You got to have faith first. It was a problem then, and it was still today. You can't have proof before you have faith. The world doesn't work that way in any part of it. Proof is the completion of faith. Proof is the end result of faith. And this is why John wrote in his epistle, this is the Apostle John in 1 John chapter 3, Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet appeared as yet what we will be. We know that when he appears, we will be like him, because we will see him just as he is. And everyone who has this hope fixed on him purifies himself, just as he is pure. John is saying that we will see him as he is someday. There's proof in that statement. We're gonna see him as he is. We're gonna be right there with him. We're gonna have that then. But until now, we have hope. We have hope. We have faith now. We have belief now. We will have proof eventually. And with this in mind, the steps down the road to proof basically go like this. And I'll put these up on the board for you. I didn't leave lines, but in your outline, but you can put them up there. Proof begins as evidence, okay? And evidence gives way to faith, and faith eventually gives way to proof. You start with evidence. Evidence gives way to faith. Faith, over time, gives way to proof. And this isn't just a religious thing. This isn't just a Christian thing. This is the way it works everywhere in all of God's universe. Evidence leads to faith. Faith leads to proof. It is as true in science as it is in faith. For example, we can observe this in the way that we discovered the planets Neptune and Pluto over the past a few centuries. And by the way, when I said the planet Pluto, those of us who are under 25 here already know that it's a dwarf planet, right? And those of us who are older than that remember it being defined as a planet. There was a change there. Some people took it really hard. I was one of those guys that took it really hard. But as I looked at the evidence and I looked at the reasoning, I was like, no, you're probably right about that. I admit it grudgingly, but it's hard for me to see Pluto as a dwarf planet. But believe it or not, the discovery of Pluto, whether you call it a planet or a dwarf planet, all started with the discovery of the planet Uranus in 1781. It goes back that far. Upon the discovery of Uranus, astronomers of that day noted irregular movements in its orbit, which caused them to believe that there was another planet out there affecting it. It was moving strange. It wasn't moving the way that they thought it should. There must be something else out there affecting it. There was no proof that this planet existed, but there was evidence to support the existence of this planet, and that evidence drove them to search. It led the search for the eighth planet, and Neptune was discovered in the year 1846. Did you guys know that? It was discovered. They went looking for it because they said, you know what, Uranus isn't moving right. Something else has got to be out there, and they found it. However, the calculations of the astronomers at that time convinced them that the presence of Neptune wasn't sufficient to account for the irregular movements of Uranus. And this caused some of them to believe that there was actually still yet another planet out there which was affecting Uranus, and they started calling it Planet X, all right? And this speculation went on. And then there was in the mid to late 1800s, there was a man by the name of Percival Lowell who began to follow this evidence. Now, Percival Lowell was a controversial figure. Some would call him an astronomer, some would call him a businessman. The man was a little strange. If you read up on him, you'll see that. But he had a lot of money, and he loved chasing this stuff, and so he started really aggressively looking for this planet. He dedicated years of his life to the search, and published a lot of arguments for the existence of Planet X based upon the evidence that he was finding. But he never ended up finding it, and he died believing it was out there, but never discovering it. But not long after Lowell's death, a young astronomer by the name of Clyde Tombaugh took a position at the Lowell Observatory, in Flagstaff, and he picked up, following the evidence, where Lowell left off. And he continued to search for the planet in the areas where Lowell had said it might be. And in 1930, guess what? He found something. It was ever so faint, but he found it. And sure enough, Planet X was proven, and it was given the name Pluto. So, now, some of you already know this. Some of you already know that Voyager eventually went past Neptune and discovered that the size wasn't wrong, and that the whole reason that they were searching for Pluto was based upon erroneous data. But that doesn't matter. My illustration is important, so we're going to stick with my version, okay? And that is that it really did. That evidence, even though it was a little bit off, drove the search. It all started with evidence, the search for Pluto. And it didn't stop there. The evidence yielded faith in some astronomers that Pluto existed. They didn't see it, but they believed it was out there. And they eventually found it by searching for it. And the belief, the faith, based upon the evidence, drove them to search, and they eventually found it. And so the idea here, again, is up on the board. Evidence leads to faith, and faith leads to proof. The evidence begets faith in a person. The faith is what drives them to look, and eventually they find their proof. That is just the way it works in all of God's creation. It was faith in the existence of Pluto before it was proven that drove the actual discovery of the planet. And the existence of Pluto was proven because some were willing to believe based upon the evidence before the absolute proof was found. And the lesson learned here is that the ones who are willing to follow the evidence are the ones that find the proof. And I hope you guys are seeing here that this is exactly the way it works for us. There is so much compelling evidence of Christ and his kingdom, and the fact that all of these things all the stuff that's wrong with this world is going to be set right, that God created it, that we messed it up, that he's fixing it. The evidence is all out there. And we have every reason to believe it. And we will have the proof in our hand someday, even though we don't have it now. And there have been people all throughout history who have lived in faith and died in faith and are experiencing it now. And that is exactly the way it's supposed to work for us. And even though we don't have 100% proof now, does not mean in any way that we shouldn't believe it. And it is the faith that drives us to pursue it. Does this make sense? That is the way belief works. That is the way faith works.